The average species on Earth lasts for only about 4 million years. So if you wish to be around for billions of years, you must be as fickle as the atoms that made you. You must be prepared to change everything about yourself: shape, size, color, species affiliation, everything, and to do so repeatedly. Hi everyone, welcome to my sentient rock panel. It's going to be weird. Just a reminder that this is a recording since I'm on a trip this weekend and I don't have access to my laptop right now, so I'll be watching in the chat and I'll theoretically be able to answer questions live after the recording ends. So before I start, I just want to mention a couple of disclaimers. First, everything in this panel is based on my own unverified personal gnosis and related theories. For those who aren't familiar with UPG, that just means that these are my personal experiences and beliefs, and that I'm not making claims about consensus reality or imposing my beliefs on other people's experiences. If I talk about something like it's real, that's just because it's real to me. I want to be extra clear about that in this panel because the content deals with the nature of Earth as a planet, and as such may contain unreality triggers. If you're someone who's sensitive to things like existential topics, descriptions of spiritual experiences, or the idea of non-living things being conscious, please be mindful of your mental state while attending this panel and leave if you need to. Next, no dichotomies. I believe that categories like spiritual, psychological, and scientific are just different ways of interpreting reality and are not mutually exclusive. I'm going to reference some spiritual concepts like souls and past lives because they're the most accurate words I have, but a lot of my theories about reality actually involve physics. Next, consent. I'll be referencing the experiences of another system during this panel. I have their consent to share what's in here, but I'm not going to answer any questions about them specifically. And lastly, I love puns. I love having a kin type with so much potential for puns. Please make terrible rock jokes at my expense. So, just a quick intro to start us off. My name is Rowan. I use they, them pronouns. I'm non-human, and I'm most publicly a snow leopard Therian. I'm a median system, but our alter humanity is shared, and we usually present as a collective, so it's totally fine to refer to me like I'm one person. I've been hanging out with other alter humans on and offline for most of my life, and the content of this panel is the product of multiple decades of experiences and introspection. And I can feel some confusion starting to creep in a little bit. You're a cat, but isn't this a panel about being a rock? And the answer is yes, but also no. It's complicated. So basically, I spent most of my life thinking I was a cat and a couple of birds, because that's the majority of my daily experiences on sort of a surface level. But I also spent those years kind of constantly ignoring the feeling that I was missing something big and brushing off all sorts of weird experiences, both because I didn't have a framework to explain them and also because back in like 2012, talking about them publicly probably would have gotten me either harassed or fake claimed by people both inside and outside the community. So, while I spent most of my life thinking of myself as this, what I actually am is this. I am not just a cat in a human body. What I actually am is a rock that's shaped like a cat in a human body. My kin types are forms that I picked up from past lives, but I was a rock first, and it's kind of integral to who I am. I've got layers. More specifically, I'm granite. I'm pretty sure I was a lopalith, which is when magma fills a space like this, and some of you have probably already noticed something here, which kind of hit me like a sack of bricks when I figured out the granite thing. Just gonna let everyone stare at that for a second. I think I spent like an hour alternating between staring into space and laughing uncontrollably when I realized this. I've really just been shapeshifting granite this entire time, and it makes me feel kind of like a cartoon character. So yeah, the rock thing is cool and it's kind of funny, but it's actually only one piece of the picture. What I am at my core, and the thing I avoided facing for so long, is something I've been calling Earthkind, which is basically partway between being an object, a concept, and a spirit. The best way to explain what that means is to read a piece I wrote titled Connections, Memories, and Being. There'll be a transcript on your screen for anyone who needs it, but I'm going to actually invite everyone to close your eyes while I read if you're able to. I am part of the earth. I awoke within it as the spinning began, and I was born as the first molten rock burst out into the darkness. I was a speck of wild, joyful energy, and we all sang together through the long, glowing night. I watched as the first life formed, and I passed through and between them as the eons passed, sometimes watching or guiding, and sometimes becoming, always part of the flow of energy. The closest words for us would be caretaker, or facilitator, or catalyst, I think, or even appendage. More expansive in a way than typical souls, but also more primitive and less defined, and wholly and completely part of the earth, bound to it in the way a heart is bound to a body. Certainly nothing so grand or complex as what most humans would consider gods, but perhaps spirits or forces of nature. I gained a sense of individuality as time went on, as we all collected different experiences and found homes or preferences. I found my home in the first forests. Lichen, moss, lycophytes, ferns, horsetail, conifers, and finally broadleaf trees. I hold them all within me always, though most flowering plants are still so young and new to me. I used the forms of forest creatures to move among them. The ones that move fast have always been my favorites. The older trees all call me Little One, with great affection, and I think that's the closest thing I have to a title. There are others much larger and broader than me, certainly. I am one of many little ones. We are perhaps less comparable to hearts and more to blood, flowing and repairing, aiding growth, quicker and more mobile than our larger siblings and cousins. We are the earth's eyes and ears, its whiskers, feet, nose, and tongue. When the humans came to my forest, I had taken the form of a red deer. I taught and guided them as friends, and I saw them as creatures who could be caretakers like myself. I remember helping them place the stones they used to talk to the sun. I remember how beautiful their paintings were, and how they made stories out of the stars. I remember the moors and the fog, and how much they felt like home. I know there were more of us tending the forests who took the same shapes as me. There are fewer of us now. The forests are disappearing, and we've had to move on. When my forest was gone, I remember taking an animal form and dying. I remember an unfamiliar human finding my body and asking it for guidance. I remember deciding to be born among them so we could speak. I lived as their guest for many years, and we taught each other so much. We loved one another as family, and at times I missed them dearly. I remember being a barred owl in the sprawling swamps. I remember how large the trees were and how loud the night was. I remember being a young gerfalcon and being caught in a storm and swept out to sea where I drowned. I remember being a red-tailed hawk and preening a mate that I'd loved before in a different shape. When I'm reminded, I remember being a small feathered dinosaur and how raucous and unafraid we were. I remember how I caught flying insects in my teeth. Most recently, I was a snow leopard in the mountains because I wanted to be close to the sky. I remember being shot in the leg near a fence where I died and wondering why. I remember choosing this body to find the answer. There are many more things I do not remember, and many things I often forget, but I know I will remember them when I'm outside this body again, or sometimes while I sleep. There are many things I do not need to know while I'm in a human shape. I do remember being an infant, and knowing how much older I was than everyone around me. That feeling has never once left me. I've always known what I am, even if I didn't have the words for it. I chose to experience a concussion in this life to finally know what it feels like to be without that, to experience the life the way humans do. It was terrifying and confusing, and I felt so lost without my connections, intuition, or sense of purpose, without the ever-present assurance that I am part of a larger whole. No wonder humans have always looked to gods, philosophies, and kings for guidance. I never realized just how alone and unsure they must feel otherwise. I understand them so much more deeply now. I know all of these things sometimes, but they are who I am underneath, when I'm alone in the forest or gazing at the sky or the sea, when I can feel the earth under my skin and the border between me and everywhere becomes hazy, when I can feel every root and stone with my breath. Right now I'm a human who has a soul shaped mostly like a cat, and I will live this life as best I can. I'm here to learn and watch and guide, and I've already done so much. Sometimes I forget who I am underneath entirely, And those are good days because I'm experiencing life as a human-shaped animal in this world. I hope I'm able to do good while I'm here. I know I already have. All right, you can open your eyes if you close them. And before I continue, I do want to clarify I didn't actually purposely give myself a concussion. The wording there is based on sort of vague feelings I have about how my life works. So I lied a little bit earlier. I'm not just a rock shaped like a cat in a human body. What I actually am is some ancient lava that became sentient, cooled into a chunk of granite, found a job, had a few billion years of experiences as a shape-shifting spirit thing, and is currently shaped like a cat in a human body. And all that is cool and weird and makes basically everything about me finally make sense, but I'm also a huge skeptic and a science nerd, so it really bothered me that I didn't have a theory for why something like me exists, and why I have such a distinct memory of suddenly becoming what I am. And I would probably still be stuck there, except I'm not alone. Last year, I met another system with members who are basically the same kind of thing as me, which was really cool and also kind of existentially weird for all of us because of how complicated and abstract this stuff is. Talking to them and finding out just how much we have in common led me to a kind of origin theory, which is the Theia impact, which is also known as the giant impact hypothesis. The prevailing theory is that about 4.5 billion years ago, when the solar system was still forming, a Mars-sized planet called Theia collided with Proto-Earth, an earlier version of this planet. Both of them fused, and they became the Earth and the Moon. I actually found a NASA simulation of the impact, and since this is a recording and I don't have to switch applications live, I'm going to show it to you because it's really cool. All right, so that's obviously sped up, but it's actually not by a lot. With that simulation, the moon would have been fully formed just a couple of hours after the impact. And so after that, the entire Earth was molten rock for at least 100 million years, and what most people don't know is that most of the heat in the planet's core, and really any planet's core, is actually left over from when it formed, which means the Earth's core is hot mostly because of this impact, and it's cooling so slowly that it will still be hot when the sun expands and swallows the Earth like 5 to 7 billion years from now, which is super cool. But anyway, it turns out both I and this other system have this sort of profound emotional connection to this event, and we instinctively feel like it's when we became ourselves. And if it wasn't already clear, I'm a panpsychist, which means I believe consciousness is an inherent property of matter, and I believe in past lives, which are essentially when something's consciousness stays intact after its physical body is destroyed. So my theory is, what if the sudden death and rebirth of two entire planets was so fast and intense that it somehow fused the consciousness of this new planet? What if that immense energy transfer turned the souls of those original rocks into something new, and their sense of self has stayed intact because the energy that made them is still here? And what if that made the Earth into a collective entity that actively cares for itself? And given that I've already met someone like me, right, regardless of whether anyone else believes this really out there theory about it, it makes me wonder, are there more of us out there? Are there more people that are like me in this other system living in human bodies right now? And keep in mind, it took me decades to pin down what I am, but that was mainly because there isn't really a framework for being this sort of thing. My assumption is that if there are more people that are similar, they either think they're alone or, like me, they've been kind of brushing off experiences because they don't have a cohesive explanation. So the rest of this presentation is my attempt to provide a framework for being Earthkind. It's an in-depth list I created of the defining traits and experiences I and this other system have in common. Since I only have 2 data points, it's super possible some of these things are more specific to me and them, but I've included everything that's here because it's honestly just absolutely fascinating that they and I had this many matching experiences completely independently of one another. So if anyone else shares even a couple of these things or is questioning if they do, I would love to talk to you. You can ping or DM me or whatever. I do want to mention that Earthkind is just my own personal shorthand for this concept. I think I'm the only one using it, but other people are welcome to use it if they want to, and it's not like a species name or anything, but it's a word you can use. So, defining Earthkind. Part of the Earth, and cannot be separated from it. Someone might think of themselves as literally being the Earth, but it's more likely to either see it as integral to their sense of self in some indescribable way, or someone might feel like they literally are a specific location on Earth. Here since the Earth began, and will be here until it ceases to exist. The idea of living anywhere else is inconceivable. I personally love the idea of stuff like space travel and other worlds, but there's just this deep part of me that knows I can't leave here, and I also don't want to. Partial individuality, member of a collective sense of consciousness, but may often feel distance from it. So, beyond being a system, I have a sense of being part of something bigger to the point where the idea of being a completely separate individual thing actually feels dysphoric, and being in a body makes me feel that way sometimes, which is kind of stressful. Tied to this reality and incompatible with fictionality. This one is really interesting, but it actually makes a ton of sense. So our sense of self is tied to this physical reality. So the idea of being linked to other universes or timelines just feels deeply wrong. Someone who's Earthkind could still theoretically be in the same system as fiction folk, though. And this is sort of a background identity. It's something that's like the background radiation of your life. It defines everything you do, whether you're thinking about it or not. For me, it's like my personality, my hobbies, my kin types, other stuff are my outer layer, and this is what's underneath. I do have one system member, though, who's basically only this and only fronts for things that are related to it. All right, next is profound emotional connection to the Theia impact, which we just talked about. For me, the primary emotion I associate with it is joy. It feels kind of like remembering a celebration where I got to be myself for the first time. I do actually have sort of vague memories of being like space dust before that, but this is the moment when I felt like I became me. And with that sense of being born as your current self when the Earth formed. Theia and Proto Earth sort of feel almost like my parents, which also leads to sibling like feelings toward the moon. I want to note that neither this other system or I have been able to put these feelings into words in a way that feels completely accurate, but family relationships are the closest comparison. This also comes with an affinity for volcanic activity, so molten rock feels sort of like home. If I'm ever feeling really stressed or anxious, I watch videos of like volcanic eruptions and it immediately grounds me. I used to relate to those posts about lava that were like, I want to dip my hands in it, until I realized that what I actually wanted was to be the lava. And inhibiting, inhabiting a physical body often feels unnatural and awkward. I've managed to bond with my body pretty well, but I can't think about it too hard, or I just feel like a hand trapped inside a puppet. Being constricted by the laws of physics feels weird, and I also get dysphoric about being alive when I have rock shifts. Next is panpsychism, which someone could also apply that to animism, which is sort of like a more specific type of panpsychism. That is an instinctual understanding that all matter is conscious, and for this specifically, it's also that all things are equally important. So, essentially, what this means is that I see things like size and complexity as completely neutral traits. There's no hierarchy of respect. Something like a mountain and an amoeba are both completely equal entities to me. Next is shapeshifting ability. So being able to intensely shift as anything from Earth at will, which means experiencing phantom parts, instincts, nomata, etc. It actually took me like 5 years of being around the online community to realize that being able to instantly have cameo shifts as anything you want to isn't normal. And this also affects the shape of your astral body, at least if someone believes in that. So all I can say is that I had a friend who could see auras, and we used to play a game where I would shift as random animals, and they would guess what I was based on what they saw. And we ended up only ever playing it when we were really bored because it was too easy for them. and with the shapeshifting, someone may have one or more preferred forms. So my default form, and at least in this lifetime, is a winged snow leopard, which is a combination of my Theia types. It's what I'm shifted as almost 24/7. But I'm pretty sure my like base form is actually a bunch of floating lava. But that sort of feels sort of almost like being naked, I guess. The shape that I take is based basically on comfort, and also because it was the most recent life I had that I really liked. Next, feeling fundamentally different from living things and also from typical spiritual entities, sort of being more primitive and malleable. Earthkind are basically the mind of the non-living parts of the planet. We're basically like energy with a job. Our individual traits and complex thought are a cumulative imprint from interacting with and incarnating as living things, and those may change drastically with new experiences, typically, I would say, between lifetimes. The reason I can talk and think like a human isn't because I've always been able to, it's just because I've had the experience of being in a human body. When I first formed, I had the cognitive capacity of lava. I've only gotten more complex because life on the planet has. I don't really remember much from the first 3 billion years I existed because I only had access to like microbe software. So microbes are not great at remembering stuff, so I do not remember a whole lot of stuff from when there was only microbes. And someone also cannot choose to integrate or to forget new experiences. So anything I experience becomes sort of part of my my metaphysical DNA forever, no matter how small it is. My whole sense of being is kind of cumulative, like being a conscious Katamari ball. Next is Archaeosapiens and broad perspective. So this is stuff like connections to ancient life and extinct ecosystems, which could be from any time period in the Earth's history. That could manifest as extinct kin types, but also extinct heart types or heart homes, those sort of feelings. For me, the most obvious one is extinct plants. Likely memories of past lives or of riding the consciousness of living things. So as far as I can tell, Earthkind usually act kind of like a walk-in system member. We pop into the minds of living things to learn from them and to also to see what they need. An innate sense that the present and also your current life is ephemeral, sort of like one blink in billions of years of history. What I instinctively think of as new kind of depends on the day, but the most recent it gets is the last ice age, and sometimes it's just all multicellular life. Human life feels compressed and hectic, uncomfortably fast and zoomed in. I personally feel like my natural sense of time is on a more similar scale to trees, but someone else's could be much longer or shorter. And instinctually viewing everything as parts of a system. When I look at things, I don't see individual objects or living things. I see the connections between them and everything around them. And just to be a nerd for a minute, so this is the geological timeline drawn to scale. The left side is when Proto-Earth formed. The Theia impact is about here. The earliest that we're absolutely certain there was multicellular life is about here. Dinosaurs first evolved here, and the most recent ice age is about here. So for reference, if you made your arm span into this timeline and then like rubbed your fingernail against a wall, you would have erased the entirety of human history. So some very primitive part of me remembers existing chronologically for this entire thing, and that's why the Ice Age feels really new. Next is regulation, facilitation, and observation. This is basically the conceptual part of the identity. It's like a life's purpose that came pre-programmed in my brain. So your instinctual purpose is to ensure that natural processes function smoothly, encourage connections and change, and absorb new information. This kind of stuff is really limited in a human body, but I mostly do it through art, activism, talking to people, and also just like incessantly learning everything I can all the time. It's just sort of instinctually what I'm doing at all times. A sense of overwhelming care towards all living things, and also an insatiable but patient curiosity, but doesn't intervene unless necessary, and really no judgment towards any kind of behavior. So it's kind of like a nature documentary mindset. And also, it feels kind of like being the stage crew of a play or a plainclothes staff member at an event. I just have this constant sense that everything around me is like this big, exciting event, and I'm like part of the stage that everything is standing on. Next is intentional partial incarnation, which sounds complicated. It's not. It's basically just being too big to fit into a single body. It's kind of like there's a big me that exists, and then there's a smaller version of me that is like I said before, like sort of like the hand inside the puppet. So I don't have access to my entire self while I'm in a body because I'm just too big. And I know I said before, like little one is sort of like the title that things call me, but I've also had bilocation shifts a few times, and apparently I'm like kaiju sized, so I'm just little compared to other Earthkind, I think. Um, so someone could be here either from birth or here as a walk-in, like I mentioned. And I think, like I said before, walk-ins are probably more common. I've been in my body since birth, but I have a sense that that's probably not super typical and may have taken a lot of work. There also is likely some kind of amnesia or partitioning, which could be via plurality. This is essentially to prevent like data contamination, because the point of being in a body isn't to experience being a chunk of the earth in the body, it's to experience being a living thing and to learn about the world from that perspective. However, there will probably be sort of bleed through from that larger self that doesn't fit into the body, and stuff like that happening is basically how I figured everything out and why it took so long to get enough pieces to form the whole picture. All right, next is altered states of consciousness. So this is basically being able to enter a mental state where there's no boundary between you and the rest of the world. This is a really similar state to how a lot of people try to achieve when they're meditating, but I can just kind of switch it on and off, and it's also usually triggered by being around stuff like rocks and plants. That doesn't mean anyone else would necessarily be able to do this at will, but I've had a lot of practice. And when in that state, you're sort of able to touch or speak to the energy of nearby things like animals, plants, rocks, rivers, the air, and sort of sense what they need or what the area needs as a whole. It feels like melding with my surroundings and being a little bit of everything at the same time. So if I'm outside, I'll sort of get drawn to things that want to talk to me, and I'll just sort of get a sense of like, oh, there's a drought right now, or hi, hello, that sort of thing. And this may be viewed as a form of unintentional meditation. It took me a really long time to realize that this is a specific mode I have, because I thought I was just really good at walking meditation, but it actually feels completely different from a normal meditative state. And on that topic, I also thought I was accidentally meditating when I have rock shifts, just because of how sort of grounded and open I feel when I'm in a granite state of mind. All right, lastly, these are things that we both sort of instinctually know about the type of thing we are, but that don't affect our current lives. So there are many of us who are all connected and serve a similar purpose. We are many different sizes, and our size determines our role, but there's no hierarchy. Some of us are mobile, while others are bound to one location. So I would be an example of an Earthkind that's mobile. I feel like when I'm not in a body, I'm able to move around, go different places. Maybe I'll be, a forest for a little while. I'll be something else for a bit after that. Whereas another Earthkind might have a very specific location somewhere on or in the planet that it's like, that's me. And a part of our job involves mitigating problematic entities. So things like gods or spirits would only be tolerated if they're respectful of the planet. And we can repair spiritual damage and prevent other entities from causing problems, which might mean destroying them. Again, not something that anyone can do well in a human body, just a sense that that's a functionality that we have. And also the sense that we're currently in a human body as a reaction to the sense that something is going wrong. Which, I mean, given the state of the planet, I'm not surprised. Um, so that's it for the presentation of the panel. I hope you had a nice time. This is a good reminder to never take your identity for granted, even if you think I'm full of shit. So I should hopefully be here live for a Q&A after this. So if I'm here, fingers crossed, I'll hop onto the mic when this ends. Okay, can anyone hear me? Yay, okay, good. uh, awesome. So I'm just gonna pop over to the panel questions. Before I do that, I did see a couple people mention in the chat that they feel like really similar to this, but they don't relate to everything. And like I said, like this is just stuff that me and this one other specific system have in common. I think that there could definitely be Earthkind or whatever you want to call it that are not entirely the same as me and them. And I apologize, I'm going to be coughing a lot. I have like a health issue acting up, and it's making my throat muscles weird. All right, panel questions. So I've got, did it take a long time to learn how to connect to the earth, or is that something you always sort of knew how to do? I'm gonna say that that's sort of, it's a little bit of both. So that thing I mentioned, like thinking I was accidentally meditating, is something I've always been able to do, but it took me, probably at least until my mid-20s to sort of get a different perspective on that. And it's not just like, I'm sitting in a weird mind state, but it's like actually something very specific to me that I can do. And the thing about being a rock specifically is actually pretty recent. So I always have had sort of like what I would call a rock sort of heart type sort of relationship. And actually last year I went hiking at a granite quarry, and I had basically an awakening to that of like everything around me is me. And figured out that specifically that's what I am. Let me see. Again, sorry about the coughing. I hope I'm not like deafening anyone on the mic. um, let's see. Yeah, given how fast the planet is warming recently, do you have what was that? Basically just how do you feel about how fast the planet is warming? Um, I have like weirdly sort of mixed feelings about it, because on the one hand, it's being caused by something that is new and strange and isn't something that's ever kind of happened before. But on the other hand, I also have this perspective of rapid change is cool and new and interesting. I mean, the planet formed with this huge sort of cataclysmic event, and throughout Earth's history, we've had things like very rapid extinctions. There was the the meteor that crashed into the planet with the dinosaurs. That's, I think, most people's best reference for something like that. And so I kind of have this conflicted, like, change is new and interesting, there might be new things happening, but also the way it's happening feels wrong. There we go. Probably had a question about spiritual enlightenment and ascension. I unfortunately, honestly don't have a lot of personal opinions about that sort of thing. The with the thing I am, I almost feel sort of like separated from that whole kind of cycle. But I definitely would chat with you about it later. Let's see. You mentioned no connection to fiction being a part of it, but what about viewing fiction from the framework of those stories originating from Earth, or even having a connection to fiction that's about Earth? So that one, I mean, I think for um, see, okay, sorry, reading the chat. So the fiction thing also includes stories about Earth, at least for me and this other system. It's sort of like that viewing everything through a human lens feels sort of like it almost feels like talking about an alternate universe in that there's a lot of sort of metaphor and story and all of that. And honestly, personally, the entire concept of things like metaphors and stories and narrative feels sort of alien. But that could also just be because I think this is only my third time being a human, and it's felt really weird every single time. So I don't know. It's ambiguous for whether someone else would be the sort of thing and have different feelings about it. So question, I feel yearning for the ancient earth, like a being of nature that watches and balances stuff, but you also feel disconnected from the world and this body. That's exactly how I feel sometimes. So it's basically like I know what I'm supposed to be able to be connected to, but when I'm in this body, I'm essentially being physically separated from it, which again I think is on purpose, because being able to be connected to everything skews your perception of stuff. It gives you all of these like other perspectives of seeing everything as interconnected and being unable to have an authentic animal experience and being able to shut that off, whether it's from not putting that into your body or having another system member who compartmentalizes that for you, I think is sort of part of the process. And yeah, it's sorry, I've lost my train of thought. All right. Is there like a certain chillness you feel about your own life and mortality due to a certainty that you will live again or continue to exist after this life is over? And do you have any way that you can share that feeling or assurance with non-Earthkind? So I'm not sure about the second half of that, but for the first half, definitely. I really my entire life I've never had any sort of fear or anxiety around the concept of death, like whatsoever. It feels like it's just a very natural part of existing. I've never had a fear of myself dying, and even for people around me, like the thing that I would miss is getting to spend more time with them, but I don't see it as tragic or bad or painful. I actually, I think it was 2 years ago now, and just like it, quick trigger warning for family member death if anyone needs to mute for a minute. But I my grandfather had a degenerative muscle disorder and basically decided he was done. And I was with him for a couple of days right at the end, and that is actually it felt like being very sort of peaceful and connected to who I was to help him pass on in that way. It wasn't sad, it wasn't tragic, it felt like part of my job to help him move on to his next stage, basically. Let's see, you said something in the presentation about being a forest for a bit. Did the plants have individual identities, or was it more of a hive mind situation? So I for me, it's not so much that I literally was everything in the forest, I was the thing that was taking care of the forest. So, every plant was like an individual to me, but also was connected to each other. I almost sort of was the connections between them. So I would think someone probably who is a forest, it would make sense to feel like a hive mind because you're being all of those connections simultaneously. That's sort of what it felt like for me. Um, but it's sort of complicated and hard to describe. Let's see. Do you think you are fundamentally a different thing from most other animals or incarnations? Or do you personally think most animals have some kind of Earthkind roots? That is honestly, that's something I've thought about a lot, and I really have 0 clue. I get the sense that, um, I am different. I talked about more about sort of being this more sort of primitive, kind of malleable type of thing, and it feels different from being, like, something that is an animal. I'm sort of something that I couldn't by myself, just be an animal. I would need there to be almost like a soul in that animal first, and for me to come share that experience with it. So I actually have a theory that, like I said, I've been here from birth in my current body. I have sort of these vague, I don't know what you call them, interactions or whatever, that there's some entity that helped me do that, and that essentially, instead of there being a whole soul in this body first, there was sort of just enough of something else that it's allowed me to bond with this body. So we actually have one member of our system who basically just is our body. They're kind of like a separate thing from the rest of us, and they're the only one of us that feels human, but they only feel human in a very physical way and pretty much don't have thought processes or anything. So I kind of get the sense that there needs to be something else in a body first as kind of like the glue. And I don't know whether it's possible that, everything else like is like that, whether there's an in between, but yeah, it's weird and complicated. I'm not really sure. I've been thinking about this stuff for a couple decades and who knows. All right. All right, some of us are having technical issue and can't hear you. Would you be able to answer or summarize? I obviously answering that I can't do via speech. I'll make a thread later. Um, all right, and actually we're at 11:58 right now. So, we're getting close to time. I think what I'm gonna do since where I am right now, I'm gonna be like having to get into a car in like 15 minutes. So, what I'm gonna do, I'll make a discussion thread for anyone who wants to either ask more questions or talk about this, and then I'll take a look at it later when I'm done being in a car, which I think I'm probably be like 4 hours from now. So thank you everyone for coming. This has been fun. I'm sorry that there was all the technical difficulties with the video. The as long as someone's been recording the Q&A, I'm hoping we can sort of use the original video and then just attach the Q&A at the end so that people can watch it without lag. So yeah, thank you all for coming, and I hope you have a great rest of your con.